Will there always be teacher shortages in special education? There are surpluses of teachers in Canada, the surpluses of teachers in Ireland. There are surpluses of teachers in countries like Singapore. So it is possible to solve teacher shortages. We have solved them before in the United States, but right now we are in a situation where the conditions for teaching are not such that we will easily solve shortages without changing some policies. So you can see that there have been headlines all across the country for the last several years about shortages. Teacher preparation enrollments have been going down, and they went down even further in the subsequent years to this graph, partly because, of course, there were layoffs during the recession. So if you were coming into a profession, choosing teaching didn't seem to make a lot of sense. But there's also been a lot of teacher bashing this last decade. And as we will see in a moment, salaries for teachers have also been going down since the early 1990s. So they're now approximately 30% below the salaries of other college-educated workers in many states. Demand for teachers surpassed supply somewhere around 2013, and the gap has been growing since. We estimated with our projection methodology that we would have about 100,000 gap between supply and demand in 2017. And then we looked at state data in 2017, and lo and behold, there was more than 100,000 teachers either hired on emergency or substandard credentials or unfilled vacancies. So that gap, in fact, has materialized. It's actually even a little bigger than that. We've had more than 40 states with shortages, almost every state in special education, also math and science. But the shortages vary a lot by state. So Arizona has had extensive shortages. We have an interactive map on the Learning Policy Institute website, which shows ratings of states by their attractiveness and their equity, the extent to which students in high minority and low minority schools get equally qualified and experienced teachers. You can see that Wyoming is the top rated state right now. Very high salary competitiveness, small pupil-teacher ratios, substantial support, very few uncertified teachers, less than 1%. Arizona, the opposite, very low salary competitiveness, poor working conditions, many uncertified teachers. Uncertified teachers, whether you believe that licensing equates with quality or not, is a very good marker of shortages because most states have a requirement that you don't hire an uncertified teacher unless there's no certified teacher available. So this is just that interactive map, and you can see that the dark blue states are the ones that have the highest teacher attractiveness ratings. The light green states have the lowest teacher attractiveness ratings. Better ratings are typically in New England and some parts of the Midwest. The lower ratings are typically in the South and in the Southwest. A big gap between the proportions of uncertified teachers in high minority and low minority schools. Studies have found that on average, uncertified teachers in special education especially have a negative effect on student achievement. Teachers without preparation not only produce lower student outcomes, generally speaking, but much higher attrition. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to leave than those who are fully prepared, which creates churn and a revolving door in the schools. And then you can't get the advantage of the professional development and school improvement efforts. Teacher attrition drives most of teacher demand. 9 out of 10 teachers who are hired each year are hired to replace people who left. And only 1/3 of the people who left for retirement. If we could get attrition under control, we would have a very different picture. In the US, generally about 8% of teachers leave each year. In countries like Canada, Singapore, Finland, the number is 3 to 4% of teachers leaving each year. So we're much higher than those high achieving countries. And it's even higher in special education. If we could cut attrition in half, you can see that the supply needed would be below the level of the demand. So in other words, we could solve shortages just by reducing attrition. But in order to do that, we have to improve the working conditions. So we have on our website at Learning Policy Institute an attrition calculator. This is a picture of it. You can go on and just put in attrition calculator and find it. For any district or state, you can put in the total number of teachers that have left. For example, in the previous year, we've calculated the average costs of replacing teachers for different types of districts, and then you can see what turnover is costing you in your state or your district or school, and how much you could save. It's about $20,000 per teacher in replacement costs in an urban area, for example. Imagine if you could just spend that $20,000 on mentoring and supports for teaching rather than on replacing teachers who are leaving, and you can imagine how much more quality we could get in the system that way. So this is not a surprise to you. The people who leave teaching at higher rates are also the ones where we have the greatest shortages. Beginning teachers typically leave at higher rates, especially if they're not mentored. Math, science, special education, teachers of ELs, teachers in high poverty, high minority schools, teachers of color leave at higher rates as well, and they tend to be in the high poverty, high minority schools. About 55% of teachers who leave note specific dissatisfactions that have caused them to leave. In the recent federal survey, accountability pressures was the #1 reason that teachers gave for leaving. Administrative supports is always important. Working conditions are important. And administrative support matters greatly. For the teachers who strongly disagree that their administrators are supportive, they leave at more than twice the rate of those who feel administrators are supportive. So having principals trained to create collegial, collaborative, supportive working conditions can make a big difference. What would bring leavers back? Well, things ranging from salaries and retirement benefits to class sizes, reciprocity and certification, but also things like forgiving student loans and providing housing incentives. You've got to add teachers if you want to reduce class sizes. What happens in high schools is that you end up with very small class sizes in advanced, like Latin class or something like that, which then leads to bigger class sizes in a lot of other classes. So sometimes it means balancing out what you're offering in order to reduce class sizes where they're most needed. You have to hire more teachers or assign teachers differently to get smaller class sizes. In the US, only about 50% of education employees are classroom teachers. In many other countries, about 70 or 80% of education employees are classroom teachers. They have fewer paraprofessionals and they have fewer administrative staff. So the other way to get smaller class sizes, as well as the other way to get more time for teachers to plan and collaborate, is to hire more teachers and fewer non-teaching personnel, which means you sometimes have to redesign the way you organize. The fastest short-term way to solve shortages is, #1, offer forgivable loans and scholarships to people who will come into teaching and pay back that loan with 3, 4, 5 years of service. One of the big things keeping people from going into teaching, even when they want to, is the level of debt. Student debt is out of control in this country, and people make decisions about what professions they can afford to enter based on the salary of the profession and the amount of debt. Particularly if they have graduate level programs like teacher residencies or post-baccalaureate MAT programs, and put in place service scholarships or forgivable loans. Within 1 year, you can get a lot of people getting prepared to teach and going into teaching and staying for 3, 4, 5 years. And often once they've gotten over the hump, they stay for the career. You can also raise salaries. Raising salaries to be equivalent to those that college graduates are earning will solve shortages in a year. I remember in New York City when by court order they had to raise salaries to be competitive with the surrounding districts. And in 1 year, they went from having about half of their teachers coming in without full credentialing to 90% coming in with full credentialing. So salaries matter, but if you can't afford to raise salaries, which is a big bite, although many states are now beginning to do that because of the strikes, then forgivable loans and scholarships is the fastest way to get people in and solve shortages with quality and with the chance that it won't be a revolving door. The other thing that people often do is just lower the standards and say anybody who's breathing can teach. I came into teaching during an era like that. They called it the breath test. You could fog the mirror, you could get hired, but that leads to a lot of churn. It leads to a lot of ineffectiveness. It leads to a lot of floundering, and it doesn't actually solve the shortage. It just perpetuates it. Teacher residencies are catching on. We just got $75 million for teacher residencies in California, Texas, Louisiana, some other places are doing it. It's a 1-year program, post-baccalaureate, so you can get people in quickly rather than waiting 4 years for a new crop of people to come through undergraduate, but have them trained by the very best teachers in those districts while they get their credential, and they have very high retention rates and start to solve the problem, particularly in fields like special ed, math, science, which otherwise just are continual churn. I think the other argument that makes a difference is to obviously keep the teachers you have. We often treat teachers like disposable items. If you can keep good teachers you have and start to focus on that, it actually can make quite a difference. And finally, use other tools. For example, many people have retired, partly because teaching became less and less attractive during the era of No Child Left Behind, during the recession. But there are ways to allow retirees to teach again. Some states have figured out how to do that in a way that's revenue neutral. If they come back and keep their pension, but they still contribute to the retirement system. So giving policymakers some of these strategies that actually bring qualified people back into the classroom, enable them to get into the classroom quickly while they're building a stronger profession so that they won't continue to have shortages. Learning from other teachers is so important, as you know. And one of the things that I think we need to improve, both in traditional programs and alternative programs, is the nature and the extent of student teaching. So if you've had a full year of student teaching with graduated responsibility, as residents would have in a residency, and as some of the MAT programs have been doing for years, your readiness to be on the ground doing what you need to do that following year in the classroom is much higher than if you've had 10 or 12 weeks or 15 weeks. So I think preparation programs need to get to a full year of student teaching with excellent teachers that allow them to do some inclusion and co-teaching, as well as pull out and resource room experiences so they have that range of practices. I came into teaching through an alternate route. So I got very little student teaching at all, and it was not from a teacher who knew very much. But some states have stronger alternate routes than others. And in California, we've been strengthening ours by requiring certain kinds of pre-service learning and student teaching before you get there in the fall. And also ensuring that there's a certain amount of supervised mentoring, a particular kind of a particular quality from an in-content area mentor. We've got to be able to ensure that teachers are able to learn from other expert teachers. What other countries do. Salaries are competitive with other fields, mentoring, lots of time for collaborative planning and collegial learning opportunities. They have more time in the day. U.S. teachers teach more hours per week and year than teachers in almost any other country in the world, and have less planning time than teachers in other countries. So these kinds of conditions of teaching make a big difference. What matters are four things: compensation, preparation, mentoring, and teaching conditions. Salaries have really lost ground since the 1990s, so we're at a low point. And in 30 states, a teacher heading a family of four is actually eligible for government assistance like free and reduced price lunch or food stamps. So we are in a moment where salaries are on the table. The vast majority of the public thinks that teachers are underpaid and should be paid more. And I think that's part of the process, but you also have to have good working conditions, because it's not enough to keep you in a tough profession if you're not getting that. Preparation and mentoring strongly influence teacher effectiveness and retention. We've talked about that and the debt load. And we've got fewer teachers today getting mentoring than we had in 2008, because a lot of those programs got cut in the recession. So getting that back is really important. The conditions I mentioned, in addition to the fact that there are worse conditions inside schools, children in this country are experiencing high rates of poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, healthcare inadequacy. We are really at a moment where we are aggressively neglecting our young people. This could not be more true than in special education. So there's a whole bigger societal agenda that has to be taken on here that makes teaching a lot more challenging, a lot more difficult when the rest of society is not supporting children. This teacher who went from Oklahoma to Arkansas pointed out the differences in the salaries and the supports that she got. It is really different from community to community and state to state. And I would say wherever you are, you might benefit as you're trying to influence policy there by pointing to the places where people have taken some steps forward. Policy recommendations, there are four big areas that we've talked about. States are, in fact, beginning to take a look at how to improve salaries with other kinds of financial incentives, forgivable loans and scholarships. The report that we just released shows the number of states and which states are tackling all of these things. About 25% of teachers leave the state that they started teaching in. License, reciprocity, carrying your pension with you, all those things can make a big difference. Also, there are many teachers, you probably know them, who are now real estate agents because they couldn't figure out how to carry their pension or their license into another state when they moved with family or for other reasons. Residencies, I want to take one more minute on because that is cropping up across the country. There's federal support for it. You can use ESSA funding under Title II, but you can also use HEA funding under Title II. In these programs where candidates come in, they have reduced or free tuition. They get a stipend while they train. They're in the very best schools in urban and rural areas with the teachers who are the most expert. The preparation program wraps around the residency experience with coursework that allows the credentialing to occur during that year. We're seeing high rates of effectiveness, high rates of diversity, and high rates of retention. And I think it's a very important strategy for special education. In fact, our governor allocated $50 million specifically for special education residencies. When you can get 80 or 90% of people staying at the end of having been trained by a really good teacher, you get much better outcomes. And districts are no longer in the churn. In San Francisco, 100% of principals said that the residents were more effective than teachers coming in through other pathways. They're staying at more than twice the rate, more than 80% staying as opposed to 38% of all the other beginning teachers. So I highly recommend it to you as a strategy, both if you're a teacher educator and if you are in a state agency. Grow your own programs can be extremely effective. And in special education, paraprofessional programs that enable paraprofessionals to become teachers can be a really good pathway because so many of the paraprofessionals are in special education. They're often people of color. They're often in high-need communities. And so you can get a really good pathway. California's got a great program in its classified staff scholarship program and has gotten a couple of thousand teachers through that pathway, 92% of them still staying. A lot of states are using the 3% set aside under Title II for leadership development, and that is a good way to help leaders learn how to be an advocate and a supporter of teachers so that they become one of those magnet principals rather than one from whom teachers are running away. There are a lot of state actions around compensation, both in terms of overall salaries, career ladders, salaries for national board certified teachers, various kinds of approaches that are going on. Washington State is our last example. They've taken a very comprehensive approach. They're doing a whole variety of forgivable loans and scholarships, high school pathways to get kids interested in teaching and giving them experiences and career pathways so that they'll go on into teaching, pathway with bilingual students in particular so that they can bring them into the profession. They've got paraprofessionals, grow your own, residencies, and ways to retool educators for free, paying for their learning if they go back. And special ed is one of the areas where many states want existing educators to go back and add credentials. Mentoring, which already reduced their beginning teacher attrition rate from 10% to 6% in the districts that had it. Remember I said if you could cut attrition in half, you could be very close to ending shortages. So these kinds of things really do work. And leadership development, as I mentioned. Compensation is actually tied to inflation each year, so it can't fall behind inflation. It's tied to cost of living. It's tied to content area shortages, additional responsibilities, board certification. They're also doing recruitment incentives for retirees, for reciprocity. If you want to see what it looks like when you put it all together, Washington is a really good example. With respect to special ed in particular, the need for a reboot in the way that the law is implemented and designed is going to be necessary. But even within that framework, there are schools and districts that have figured out how to reduce that load on special ed teachers, to make it less procedural, to provide supports for some of those parts of the job. So that's part of making it a more attractive profession. Again, creating a collegial, collaborative workplace where people feel supported and want to stay and care for their colleagues and feel that their colleagues care for them is another way to deal with the fact that you may be paying less than the state next door. People do have to make a living, so I don't want to be heard to argue against a living wage and reasonable salaries, but while you're trying to get the wages up, trying to get the working conditions to be more supportive is the other way to keep teachers. The district I live in, Palo Alto district, has a lot of teachers sharing jobs. Everything from kindergarten teachers who one of them does the morning and one does the afternoon, to elementary teachers who actually have certain days of the week where they may share a job and then they co-plan, to secondary teachers where it's a lot easier, doing 2 periods a day and somebody else is doing 2 or 3 periods a day, and that's an easier way of splitting a job. that kind of thing. Also childcare, providing childcare for teachers. If you are a low wage earner, you think about what makes it hard, or if you have other family and circumstances you're dealing with, paying for childcare, in some communities paying for housing, and there are districts that are doing housing supports for teachers, even building housing for teachers. That's not unusual. But job shares is another piece of it. Finding those ways where you can make the work affordable and doable